All right, so let me talk about what I want to talk about today. And I thought I make it a little bit more entertaining. And one of the streets next to where I live, just one block down, is called Fulton. Now, Fulton has a special meaning to me because back in the days when I was a student in mechanical engineering, Robert Fulton was very famous. Robert Fulton was known to invent the first steam engine boat, steamboat, river steamboat. And he did that in the early 1800s. Now, it took 50 years before we learned how to put a steam engine inside a gunboat. And it revolutionized military because now not only can we travel very far, we can carry a lot of armory. In 1853, Commodore Perry, who was an admiral in the US Navy, took 4 of those steam engine gunboats all the way around the world, starting from the east coast of United States, travel all the way down to Japan, sail into the Tokyo Bay, and point those cannons into the palace and force the Japanese to open trade. Because Japan, like China, like Korea back in those days, were very backward compared to the West. They didn't really specialize in this modern warfare, and so they had really no way of defending themselves. But it shocked the Japanese. They shocked them into understanding the new order. So they decided that they want to modernize. Now, but before I talk about how they modernized, I need to go back and talk about what was the society in Japan then. Now, most of you have seen the TV series called Shogun. But Shogun, the TV series, talk about that part of the history. And Shogun actually started in 1600, when Japan was controlled by the warlords, these samurais. Well, in Shogun, it was Lord Toranaga, right? But in real life, it was not Toranaga, it was Tokugawa. That's the real life. And you remember the story about how he fought all his enemy and united Japan under his control and started what is called the Edo era. Edo means, it's basically Tokyo. It means the East capital, whereas Kyoto, the old capital, just means capital. And so it started the Edo era, and his family was able to control Japan for almost 300 years, 260 something years. And when Commodore Perry drove the steam gunboats into Tokyo Bay, it forces the Japanese to recognize the importance of modernization. Otherwise, they have no way of protecting themselves. So there was a revolution of sort. And for those of you who watch the other movie called The Last Samurai by Tom Cruise would know that, because it talks about basically the end of what is called the Meiji Revolution, where they decided to abandon the samurai system. Basically took the power away from the Tokugawa family and restored the power to the imperial court, right? Remember that, right? And so the movie Last Samurai was actually based on a real event called the Satsuma Revolution, which is actually in Gaosu, the southernmost island of Japan next to Nagasaki, right? So I think we all understand that part of the history. Now, if you kind of look at that history and then start to understand that and how Buddhism became popular in Japan and how Buddhism was really the enabler for the samurai, then you understand why we do what we do here. Now, if you look at, let's come back and now look at how Buddhism first came to Japan. So Buddhism came to China from India all the way around the Pakistan, the Kazakhstan, like that, entered into Tibet, and eventually came to China in basically about 200 years before Christ. But it didn't actually get to come to Japan until the 6th century, much later, almost 900 years later. And it first came to Japan, it wasn't very popular, and then it became popular in what is called the Kamakura era. And that's really like almost 200 years before Toranaga, Tokugawa. So when Buddhism came to Japan and when Zen Buddhism came to Japan, it lifted up the samurais into a much higher class. And so the country, the power of the country, went from the imperial court to the warlords, and it was Tokugawa who united it, and then eventually had to give it back to the emperor. So the question is, how did the samurai become so powerful? Back then, only the higher class, only the samurais will study meditation. I posted an article, I thought that was a great article, that talks about human body, and it's really related to something that I talked about earlier, which is the 5 skandhas. That there's the form, and the form is just everything that is physical about us and about us around us. So it includes the physics and the physiology. That's the first one. The second one is what I call sensation, is when the eye sees the light, the ear sees the sound, the nose to smell, the mouth to taste, the body to touch. That takes physiology into neurology. And all the neural ending ends in the spiral cord. That's called sensation. And then they get bundled, send it to the brain, the thinking mind, and that's what I call feeling. And then from there, it creates the emotion and so on and so forth. I talk about that. Well, this paper that I pass around, this article that I pass around, I couldn't post a link on our group, but I posted on our Patreon group. So if you go there and you will see the original article. It talks about the speed of propagation of a nerve signal from our eye, ear, nose, body to the spine. The speed of that, the processing speed of that is one, I believe it's 1 billion times a second. 1 billion times a second. What we would now these days call 1 gigahertz. You say, well, 1 gigahertz, that's very high. Well, actually not so much, because when you push your remote control to open your garage door, that's 2.4 gigaseconds. So that's fast, right? That's fast enough that it becomes a radio wave. That is how fast the sensation works. Once it gets collected and it bundles into your thinking brain, it slows it down to 10 times a second. 10 times a second is very slow, right? Because our ear, a good ear, can hear as slow as 40 times a second. So that's very low. That's lower than that. So what meditation does to the samurais is to teach them how not to use the thinking brain, but how to use the rest of the intelligence system to understand the difference between the intelligence and the intellect. And so the whole practice using the Zen meditation is don't think, just feel. Feel, but don't think. And that's why when you see the samurai movie, the samurais would be facing each other and they would be basically meditating, slowing down the brain. And when it's time to strike, they would strike so fast that when the sword cuts through the body, it doesn't leave a blood on the sword. So what does that have to do with us? We're here to learn how not to use the brain. We're here to learn how to concentrate, but don't judge. If you concentrate, You anchor your mind on your body or on your breath. You're one with the universe. You can feel what's happening around you at 1,000,000 times a second. The minute that you judge and you label, it slows it down to 10 times a second. It unleashes what is intelligence in you without being hindered by the intellect.